Okay, thank you again to everyone for joining us and for submitting so many questions. That's been really positive to see. I'm also really happy to note that we've had more than 6,000 people watch the videos since we started doing them a month ago. That's really, really good. Caroline and I weren't sure what the level of interest would be when we started doing them, but obviously people are finding them useful. Today's session is a little bit different from the normal Q&As we've been doing. As some of you may have noted in the last video, Caroline committed to doing a workforce specific session addressing those questions from you. So we're going to get to them today. So that's why we've got Tom Power with us today, who's Director of People and Culture for NHS Grampian. So Tom, could I just bring you in to start with, just to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what your role is?
Oh yeah, thanks very much, Mike, and thanks for having me along to this Q&A. So yeah, as Mike said, I'm Director of People and Culture, and I guess that means I've got three broad areas of focus. First of all, I've got overall responsibility for health, safety and well-being for the workforce across NHS Grampian. Secondly, I've got responsibility for supporting the development of our culture and the experience that we all have at work day in, day out. And thirdly, I'm responsible for the work we need to do to secure a sustainable workforce, making sure we've got the right number of people with the right skills in place all the time moving forward. So that's how I would describe my role. There's a lot of little bits that sit under all of that, but those are the main areas that I've got overall responsibility for.
Thanks, Tom. And you've already flagged to us that it's an in-service day, so if we see any unexpected interruptions in the background, we'll know why.
Yeah, I'm kind of kicking myself for arranging to do this on when my 3- and 5-year-old are both off school and nursery for the day, and then decided as well to make an appearance at about 4:45 this morning. So anything could happen in the next hour or so, but we'll just we'll go with it and see what materialises.
And Caroline, you've got your dogs with you again today, haven't you? So
I do. Morning, Mike. Morning, Tom. I've got Ollie and Max both asleep at the moment, but I've decided to have some biscuits on my desk in the hope that that'll bribe them if they start barking at the postman or anything. So we'll see how it goes.
Maybe there's something formal from as well.
So I'll just move on. Before we get into the questions and answers themselves, one of the things Tom shared with me before we started the session was that it's something around the number of people working in NHS Grampian since before the pandemic and up until September last year. We've seen a roughly a 20% increase in the total number of people working here, which was quite striking for me. But I guess the thing we were talking about is that perhaps it doesn't actually feel that way on the ground. It feels more pressurised than ever. There's more demand on staff. I just wanted to start by opening that up for discussion. Caroline, do you want to talk about why that maybe is and why people are feeling that way?
Mike, I'm happy to share my thinking at the moment. And I'm going to start off by saying I'm not sure we're absolutely clear why it feels the way it feels and it is the way it is just now. And I think that's across Scotland actually, in regards to transitioning from the pandemic. And so I'll give it a stab, but want to set out that this is a current piece of work that Tom and others are looking at, is what is it that's underneath the sustained pressure, and everybody will have a different view on that. However, some really key things are, and Tom will talk about we absolutely have more people working in the system now than we did before the pandemic. But on top of that, we've got a whole lot of new services that have been started. So to name the obvious ones, vaccinations, test and protect, you'll all have interacted with them. They're services that we never had established at the scale before. So that's a big part of where the workforce is. The acuity of patients and the demand from the population appears to have changed. So the numbers aren't necessarily different, but actually what they're presenting with is, and we're trying to work that through just now. There has to be an element of the physical and psychological exhaustion. There just has to be. I don't know how that's contributing, and that's what we're trying to understand, and many of Tom's colleagues are working through that. But there has to be, you know what it's like if you're exhausted. Everything seems like a bigger effort, and any ask seems enormous. However, despite that, people still respond and do the best that they can, which is great. I think the other thing, and the thing I'll finish on, is fear and hope. And if you have hope, things feel better. And one of the positive things that I've heard is that people are starting to see that there is a way out of this, there potentially is an end to this, and that gives a level of energy. But there are other people in the system who are still experiencing extreme pressure and demand, and so they don't have that hope. So it's really different across the whole thing. So I think it's a mixture of what's being asked of people, what the public need just now, what the messaging is, what people are feeling individually, what they're feeling as teams, and it's all mixed up into one big picture. But what I can absolutely say is that we recognise the impact and how people are feeling is very, very real. And that's the bit we need to get underneath as we move into March, April, May type stuff. But Tom may have more information on that.
Yeah, Tom, do you want to just talk a little bit about that? Because I know obviously you're in your service, you have a lot of the workforce teams who've put a lot of effort into getting people through the doors and things, and you'll have knowledge of some of the work that's going on to try and increase those numbers going forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I mean, I think there's work we're doing under all of the three sort of broad headings I mentioned when I introduced my role earlier. And maybe if I start with the the sustainable workforce bit, trying to get the right numbers of people in place across the organisation. We've certainly done a lot of work this last few months in moving to fast track our recruitment processes to reduce the time to hire, to try and free up clinical staff time so they're not having to deal with so much of the admin. So we're taking more of that processing as well, and certainly our the number of days it takes from identifying a vacancy through to it being somebody ready to start has reduced significantly from over 100 days to substantially below that, somewhere I think 96 at the moment, and that's well below the average for NHS Scotland and I guess our own benchmark. We've also been working to look at the ways in which we attract people, and international recruitment is one area that we've been doing putting a lot of effort into organisationally to help with nursing and midwifery shortages is an example of that. And this is work that is starting, I think, to bear fruit now. It's something we have a history of in NHS Grampian anyway, and we're being able to use that expertise and experience alongside other boards in the north of Scotland to try and make this region an attractive one to come to an NHS Grampian, and within that obviously is a priority for us. So I think we'll start to see some of those numbers coming through the system now as we move into the spring, because the onboarding process for international recruits is necessarily a longer one than it is if it's somebody's already working in our system or based in the UK. So that hopefully will start to be felt a little bit more on the floor as we go through the coming months as well. So those are a couple of examples of the work we're doing around recruitment. We're also taken some steps as part of the Operation Iris response to make it easier for people who are considering retirement to return to roles or the type of roles they've been doing previously, and we're trialing a temporary change to our policy on that so that people can do that for a period of up to 12 months without necessarily having to go through some of the stages they had to previously. Now that will differ depending on individual circumstances and what people want to return to do, but we hope again that will just maybe mitigate some of the concerns people have about that people are coming to a point where they can retire and want to step off and do something different. So it hopefully increasing the opportunities for people to come back into the workplace easily as well. And then I guess I mentioned two other headings previously as well: health, safety and wellbeing, and culture and staff experience. And in order to, it's not just about attracting people to work here, it's also about retaining the people that we've got. And so it's really, really key for me that we focus on supporting people's well-being, helping them to be well at work and to stay in work. And we've got a range of supports from the We Care programme, which signposts people and provides access to a whole range of supports for individuals and their well-being, through to the Occupational Health Service and the Psychological Resilience Hub, which have themselves provided a significant amount of support to individuals over the last couple of years. And then alongside that is our focus on organisational culture, how it is to work here, how it is to experience being part of NHS Grampian, and something we've all got a stake in. And people will be aware, or may be aware, that we're running a big culture survey across nursing and midwifery and estates and facilities at the moment to understand the experiences of individuals in the teams in those services. That's really key to us in getting underneath the bonnet of what's good about working here and what could we improve and how could we collectively take action on that, because we can do all the recruitment we like, but if the environment isn't the right one for people, then they won't want to stay, and it's really key that we do that.
Thanks, Tom. It kind of ties into what Caroline said, that there is a lot of work obviously going on there, but that also some signs for hope there going forward as well. I'll just move on to the questions and answers, because I'm sure that's what people really want to hear. We've had twice as many questions as we normally do, so we're going to have to whistle through them. As always, neither Caroline or Tom have seen these questions in advance. They were both more than willing to do that, so I'm quite pleased about that, as I'm sure all you will be. The only other thing to add before we start that is that I know a lot of people have submitted non-workforce questions as well, so Caroline and I will do a further session in the next week or so to address those questions. Okay, so I'll just get started. The first one is actually something we've had from 4 different colleagues actually, including a couple on social media, who have asked about the Culture Matters survey, which, as people probably know, launched this week. But one of the things I think people maybe aren't understanding is why this is only for nursing and midwifery and some areas within estates and facilities. Maybe Tom, because I know you've been involved in this, I'll maybe come to you first to ask if there's any plans to expand that to other staff groups.
Sure, thanks, Mike. So the reason that we decided to roll the culture survey out in the first instance to these 2 staff groups, but not the whole organisation, was simply about our capacity to be able to support the work. A lot of the staff who've been involved in I guess planning how we roll out the culture survey have themselves been deployed into other areas as we've looked to work our way through the winter. And it's really important that whilst we anticipate and we hope that the majority of people will report having positive experience at work, and that the results will be something that they can work with in their teams without the need for support, we recognise as well from our experience of tools such as iMatter and other surveys that there may be a need to provide support for some teams if they get challenging results, and we need to be able to do that in a way that is effective and timely. And so, having worked over the last couple of years to try and identify a good window to run with the survey, it was clear, given the pressures we have in the system, that there was never going to be an ideal time to do this. But it is important that we lean in and find out what we can, even when times are challenging, because that's actually when we maybe learn the most. So we decided that it would be better to roll with a couple of areas now than to seek to find the ideal time to do it with everyone everywhere. And we chose to do nursing and midwifery because of both the dependency that Magnet accreditation process has on the culture survey, but also because it's a cross-cutting staff group that works in all parts of the organisation, parts of the system. And the same was true with estates and facilities on that last point. Again, it's a group of staff who work across the whole organisation, but are non-clinical. And so it gives us I guess a slice and an understanding of the organisation without the need to do it with everyone everywhere. There are, though, multiple opportunities for people to get involved in helping to share their views on the culture, and get involved in thinking about how we can develop and nurture it further. We have an culture collaborative open forum that I chair that meets every month, and the next one of those is a week on Thursday on the 24th of February. That's open to staff at any level to come along and contribute to the thinking around how we understand and work with our culture. And so I'd hope, and what we learned from the rollout of the culture survey this time will give us an indication as to whether we should be, rolling it out more broadly in future iterations to a wider staff group.
And I think, Caroline, we've heard you speak previously about how vital the Culture Matters survey is. One of the things I've heard anecdotally and from one of the questioners is that perhaps people are confused as to the timing of this. People are so busy, yet we're asking them to commit to what isn't, which is quite an extensive survey effectively, and how are they supposed to find the time? Do you want to talk a little bit about why it's so vital that we get this feedback just now and that we get that honest feedback as well?
Yeah, so this has been a really, I'm going to say, complicated piece of work to get off the ground. The original, so the survey tool that we're using is from its origin is Australian, and I first saw the impact of that and the positivity that can be driven out of it in 2017. That's how long we as an organisation have been trying to move this forward. So in answer to your question, there would appear to never be an ideal time to roll out such a survey, because it's winter, because we're in a pandemic, because we're a highly pressured system all the time, because we're doing iMatter, because there's another, if I'm honest, and Tom, you may see him smirk, I'm not looking at him, I became slightly impatient around this, because I believe if we don't have a starting point and a benchmark of where we're at, how do we know that the work we're doing is the right work? How do we know that what we perceive to be how people experience work? Because how people experience work in different environments is fundamentally different to how I experience it. So I can't pretend to know what that is. I have my ideas and I have intelligence around it, but I believe that if we are truly to have our colleagues at the centre of everything that we do and how they experience their work, we need to understand what that means from as many perspectives as possible. So I fully appreciate and have had so many conversations with Tom and colleagues around moving forward with this. And ultimately, despite my impatience, Tom and June, our nurse director, spoke to the individuals that have been closest to this work and asked for their opinion to say, should we not? And I believe, Tom, that the guidance from colleagues who would be immersed in this was we need to move forward with it now. So that's what I based the decision to move forward with it. But it's, although it is an additional ask, I hope people are supported to do it. And I am absolutely sure that if we do it well, the intelligence and therefore the change and the focus on people will be fundamentally different in this organisation.
Thanks, Caroline. Okay, and the next question comes from Dawn Marr, who's a clinical nurse specialist. She's been in touch basically to raise concerns about how challenging it is for newly registered nurses at the moment in the context of the pandemic. She mentions she's seen some colleagues signed off with mental health difficulties, and she's asked Caroline if you think specifically the Flying Start programme in its current format is fit for purpose. And she also asks if there's any extra support that could be considered for newly registered nurses at the moment.
Mike, a really, really good question. Sorry, was it Dawn or Donna?
It was Dawn.
Dawn, a really good question. And I would completely agree with you. I think that across all colleagues, professional and non-professional parts of the system coming into a new role. So let's focus on the one that you've raised. So new graduate nurses. I think that's real data. So I don't think it's just Dawn's perception. I think absolutely what we've asked of our colleagues pre-graduation and post-graduation has been really, really difficult. And the normal infrastructure that we wrap around that to support them, so practice education, the brilliant job that our registered colleagues put around new graduates, just hasn't been available because, as Tom said in the earlier question, the vast majority of our practice education colleagues are deployed clinically at the moment. So it is real. It is something that is absolutely on my radar, June Brown's radar as the nurse director. June is working really closely with the universities to understand how we can do that better and well. And education is a core part of our function as an organisation, and making people feel supported and able to do the job that they do. So back to the recruitment and the retention piece, it's critical that we get that right. To comment on the Flying Start, I can't do that, Mike, because I'm not up to date with what the most up-to-date programme is. What I can say is I think that we have an exceptional level of practice education in this organisation, having worked across Scotland, and so I have a level of assurance that it will be really good. However, I know that June and Jane Ewan and others will be actively engaging with our new graduates to understand what would be better for them. So if Dawn wants to hook into that, then Jane Ewan would be our contact.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. The next question, it comes from an anonymous colleague, basically, who asks, she says she's one of the staff on one-year contracts at the moment who came out of retirement to help the vaccination campaign. She would like to know basically what's next. She's maybe feeling a little frustrated that her contract finishes on the 31st of March and she doesn't know if she's still needed and effectively what the plan is. I don't know, is Caroline or Tom, who's best placed to answer that one?
I'm happy, Mike, to just try and give a bit of a response to that, and I think it's possibly a bit of follow-up work we need to do as well, just to ensure that the communication's right. Because I guess if somebody's contract is coming to the end at the end of March, we're now in the middle of February, then clearly, there's a need to provide some indication of where things are and what they might therefore be able to expect or not beyond the end of March. So that's something I think we just need to commit to following up with colleagues running the vaccinations programme. But in terms of, I guess, the position there, my understanding is that we have obviously had to staff up a vaccinations programme during the last year with, to be able to deal with the volume of vaccinations that was, unprecedented. And what we don't know yet is exactly what the volumes are likely to be in a sort of more steady state moving on from this financial year into 22-23. There has been extensive work ongoing, as I understand it, between ourselves and Scottish Government to establish what a sustainable model of vaccination workforce looks like, taking into account not just COVID vaccinations, but all the other vaccinations and immunisations that need to take place in any given year. And part of that has been looking at what's the right, skill mix that we need from a substantive workforce, people who are in post to do that work as their main job moving forward. And that's linked to national work on job descriptions and gradings and things like that as well. And so what that means is that there may be people who have come in to work with us over the last 12 months or so, who've come in from a variety of different backgrounds and who have taken on vaccinator roles, either on as part of, under the new role descriptions or in their existing terms and conditions. And as part of moving into the new year, we need to move to a workforce that is working with these, these substantive roles, the vaccinator or support vaccinator roles. And that's not been a straightforward process. There's a big financial element to that, and knowing exactly what we're able to afford to resource. And I think that's work that has been ongoing between the vaccination leads across the country and Scottish Government over recent months. And I would hope it's not far from a conclusion if it hasn't been landed yet. But that might explain some of the reasons why there hasn't been absolute certainty for the colleague concerned as to what the position is after the 31st of March. But I think certainly that's something we should be looking to provide some further communication on, so we can pick that
Mike, can I jump in? Just and this is the risk you run, Mike, of having the two of us here.
Indeed.
I think a really helpful point, and obviously important, as Tom has said, for somebody that's got a sense that their contract's ending in 6 weeks, that we do something about that. But I am wondering for just about the communication piece, Tom, and actually for all, so there will be a reality that some contracts will end as the vaccination programme is refined. But there's something really important about, for those that have stepped up, what else could we offer them? Because we have conversations about this every day in regards to the vacancies across the system. So there's maybe something about that process and just being clear that the contract may well be ending here, but here are all the other opportunities that we could explore with you, rather than having to start at the beginning again, which is, I'm sure, what it might feel for some people. So just a thought that's triggered, Tom, in my mind when you're looking into that comms after this.
Yes, absolutely. I guess maybe just to reflect on that comment, I suppose one of the things that I think certainly colleagues in my department have been mindful of is that people who've returned from retirement to take up a role in the vaccinations programme, for example, have come back for a specific assignment, if you like. And so we've not wanted to make assumptions about the ability to ask those people to go and do something else just because we have a pressure elsewhere in the system. But I think you made a good point about saying, well, if this isn't continuing, there are a range of other opportunities you might want to consider, and joining those dots of people. So I'll pick that up with the team off the back of this.
Thanks, both. There was a follow-up question to that one, actually, but I think you've possibly addressed that already. There was another colleague who'd said on the same topic, why are we still recruiting staff on temporary contracts when a lot of current staff who are already trained in roles, who have come in over the last year, haven't had their contracts extended beyond April? I think some of what you said from both of you there probably covers that, but does anybody else want to add anything on that specifically?
I wonder, Mike, if it's just worth adding a little bit to that, which is that, of course, we're not always recruiting to exactly the same as what we have in place now, and so simply extending people in without knowing the specifics of what's been seen to be being advertised and the role the person raising the question is in, it's difficult to say with absolute certainty. But my educated guess would be that we're having to recruit to something that is either permanent, whereas previously it's been a fixed term opportunity, in which case we are bound, we have to advertise those through open competition, or it's been a variation. So the role has been slightly different to roles that we've maybe had in place already. And again, that means that we need to advertise those. That's kind of recruitment best practice, and we have a legal obligation to do so as well. And I suppose, the other thing we have to be thoughtful about is giving ourselves the best chance to fill the post that we've got available. And that hopefully will be through people who have come in on fixed term contracts wanting to stay with us and wanting to put themselves forward for those posts. I would very much hope so. If that's happening, we're doing something right. Equally, we know that there are some areas which can be hard to fill, either because of geography or because of the discipline concerned, or maybe just because of the working pattern and working arrangements don't fit everybody, aren't that appealing to a wide range of people. So we need to give ourselves the best chance of filling posts, and that's why we'll often need to go out to advertise, even if there may be people internally who are suitable to pick those up.
Okay, thank you, Tom. The next question's another anonymous one. It basically asks what support is being given to staff with long COVID. They've also asked how long the NHS will support people with long COVID regarding reduced hours and pay. Who would like to answer that one?
So I guess the position around long COVID in terms of support that we're looking to provide is that our occupational health service are there to do that, and they have been working quite closely with colleagues in the occupational therapy department to see what we can do to support people in making a safe and sustained return to work where they've been suffering from long COVID. And it's really encouraging that the bid we put forward last autumn to NHS Charities Together for funding from the monies that Captain Tom Moore, as well as Captain Tom Moore, raised in 2020, included provision for additional funding to to support that kind of that joint work between occupational health and occupational therapy. So hopefully we'll see that continue and be strengthened locally in the coming financial year. In terms of some of the provisions around support for long COVID in terms of people's terms and conditions, that is reserved for national discussions in terms of how COVID is viewed relative to other illnesses and long-term conditions. And I think certainly through the course of the pandemic there has been a priority given to to COVID in that respect, and we need to wait and see what the discussions at a national level around terms and conditions and between employers and staff side result in terms of the status of COVID relative to all other long-term conditions moving forward, because clearly there are a range of conditions that people have that impact their ability to work, and indeed that need some support to rehabilitate them to return to the workplace in many cases as well. So I think that's something we need to just keep a watching brief on, and make sure that we're communicating through our regular channels such as the daily briefing, through the area partnership forum, as and when we get further updates from the national terms and conditions groups.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is from one of our colleagues, Linda Gray, who is CNS for Looked After Children. She's emailed in asking Caroline specifically if she thinks we need to do more to raise awareness of our corporate parenting responsibilities, which became a statutory duty for organisations as part of the Children and Young People Scotland Act in 2014. She's also asked, should the corporate parenting, which is hosted on TURAS, be made a mandatory element as well?
Linda, lovely to hear from you. It seems like a long time since we've had a conversation, so welcome your question, and my answer is yes. We can always improve our awareness and understanding of what being a corporate parent means, and we can start with anybody that doesn't know what that means. Then I would suggest that you seek to find out. Linda Gray would be an excellent contact. Actually the TURAS information is helpful. So I'm going to answer it from a pretty broad strategic perspective, Mike, which is that our role as a corporate parent, I think, sits really well with our role in regards to the prioritisation of family and children. So in my mind and in the conversations that I'm having around the strategic purpose of the NHS and how are we going to support the citizens and the families of Grampian, we have to invest in children. We have to invest in the next generation that's coming through to achieve an improvement in population health, and to do all the things that we believe we've learned from our mistakes as adults now. So how can we make it better for families and children? And part of that in particular is for our looked after young people, which is the cohort of the population that Linda's referring to. So children and young adults that have been in care, that receive additional support and care at home, then we have a role to think, how can we contribute along with the council and along with other partners to support them to thrive? And that's the ambition. So in every interaction between individuals, I know that we try really hard to do that. But as a big nebulous organisation, how do we do that? One of the things that we've done already, which I think I hope sets out my intent, is to establish a portfolio of integrated family services, and that incorporates the child element within that. And Jenny McNichol is the portfolio lead for that. So it is my belief that in general we have to prioritise children and the next generation. To do that, we have to prioritise families and how we contribute to them as a unit, and provide the right level of support around that with partners. And looked after children and young adults is key, because actually they don't have those family infrastructures that most of us are used to. So how can we contribute to them? To answer the question about mandatory, so mandatory training is a thorn in my side, and even if we make something mandatory, people don't have the capacity to do it, and it doesn't necessarily lead to any behavioural change, Linda. So I will let you have that debate with others around mandatory training, but my lived experience is that actually there has to be a different motivational drive around it that leads people to want to understand it instead of being instructed. Instructions don't work. But I wish you well, and nice to hear from you, Linda.
Thank you, Caroline. Okay, the next question comes from Stephen White, who's a senior staff nurse in critical care. He says, is there any possibility that if we do an extra shift or overtime that we can see the pay sooner? He gives the example of doing overtime in November that he didn't see until the end of January, which is obviously quite a long time. Caroline, do you want to come in on that?
So I'll come in, but I'm going to ask Tom to come in on it. So I think this is a really, really good point, and whether it is overtime or whether it is bank shifts or whether it's something else, I think we need to understand what's required to make it happen, and then is there enough of an interest? Would it make a difference to do it? And I know that Tom's been trying to understand what that looks like, because of course behind everything like that there is a big infrastructure around payroll, for example, and having the right support around that to make that happen. So really important that we are that we're doing things that make a difference to allow people to see the benefit of undertaking additional work if they're well enough to do so, and it's their choice. They don't feel pressured into doing it. But I'll let Tom pick up where him and Lorraine have got to around their thinking with this.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline, and thanks for the question. Was it Steve, if I remembered that right? Yeah. Thanks, Steve. It's a very fair question, and I suppose, you know, first things first, timely pay is really important for the work we do, particularly if you're putting in additional hours. But actually, just it's important nonetheless. And I know, you know, that is the thing that probably Lorraine, as our head of HR Service Centre and payroll and nurseries, puts, you know, at the forefront of hers and her team's thinking, is making sure that people are paid in line with the timeframes that are set out for us, and that we don't miss pay dates and payroll deadlines. And I guess I said earlier on that we've had a roughly a 20% increase in the number of people working in the organisation, and that creates a significant amount of additional transactions to process in any payroll run. And then, of course, we've had a lot of people doing work outside their normal areas and or additional hours, people doing things like the vaccination programme, for example, on top of the work they do as well, which creates further transactions. So the team's ability to process that increased volume, whilst we've been able to put some additional support in there, has been extremely challenged over the last 18 months to 2 years. It's been pretty relentless for them. So when we have to be really careful when we think about moving from, say, a monthly pay arrangement for that sort of work for bank work and to weekly, because invariably it creates more additional transactions that we have to be able to accommodate. And we need to know that, you know what the actual benefit, what the cost of doing that is in terms of hours. And we've done, you know, staff hours to do the processing. We've done some work on that, and it isn't an insignificant amount. We also need to understand the balance of that. What's the actual benefits of that perceived to be? Clearly, you know, if you did work in November and not getting paid for it until the end of January, is beyond even, you know, what we would expect in terms of it being paid within the month. So that's something that, you know, it's worth looking at. I would just highlight that there are multiple stages in that process. One is getting the hours actually recorded onto the system, which is a local responsibility. If that's done by a given payroll deadline date, then it will get processed within that month. The time period around Christmas can be challenging because of the earlier pay date just before December. So the deadline for getting things on the system is necessarily a little bit earlier. That might, in these circumstances, explain why it didn't come through till January, rather than in, say, December for work done in November. But again, I don't know the specifics of that to be able to say definitely. So it is something we're looking at. We'll give serious consideration to, but we need to understand that the benefits outweigh the costs to us of doing it. And what we don't want to do is put in jeopardy the monthly pay run for all staff, because it's really critical that we maintain that above all else.
Okay, thank you, Tom. The next one's an anonymous question. They've asked, when will the guidance for pregnant staff working from home from 28 weeks be reviewed again soon, with the aim of returning to normal? And if so, is there a time frame for that? I don't know who's best placed to answer that one.
I definitely don't know the detail of that. I'd need to check. So unless Tom does, that might be we'll get back to you.
Yeah, we probably need to get back on the question around when will it be reviewed and what will the time, what's the timelines for that, because the guidance is part of I guess a suite of guidance that has been developed during the course of the pandemic on various aspects of employment, and in the main those are developed nationally, and they're communicated to health boards in the form of directors' letters, and then we translate those into things like the HR frequently asked questions. And it's always worth having a look at those, because they do get updated periodically, and there is a section within there, I think, around both safe return to the workplace and staying in the workplace for women who are pregnant, and so it's worth having a look there just to see if there's any specifics that have changed there since it was last looked at, or it deals with a question that the person may have. I think I would expect to see some looking at the range of policy provisions in the first sort of 3 to 6 months of the coming financial year at a national level, but there's a huge number to look at, and so it'll have to work through them, and I guess that we've got to be mindful all the way through this of, we know a lot more about COVID now than we did when some of these measures were introduced. Nonetheless, we're still only 2 years, into it being a virus that we're dealing with, and the priority is always around the health and safety and well-being of the workforce. So that's why those provisions are in place, and removal of them, if you like, will be given very serious consideration because of that. I guess the purpose they serve. But we will take it away and look to get something into the daily brief in the coming weeks around the position around, I guess, COVID workforce policies and provisions.
Okay. The next question, with another 3 to go, just so you're aware. The next question is from another anonymous colleague. They basically, I'll just read the question actually. They've said they are seconded to a role in the vaccination centre and have been over the last year. They applied for the position they're in and were told that their pay would stay the same. While the hourly rate has remained the same, the enhancement stopped being paid due to it being their decision to apply, which has been a significant drop that they've had to deal with as a result of that. They just ask why that is the case and if anybody could address that. Is that one for you, Tom?
Well, I think there will be intricacies to that are probably beyond the immediate knowledge I've got in front of me. There'll be colleagues in my team who are better placed to answer that. So I'm quite happy to follow up with the person concerned offline and just see if we can get a definitive answer to that. But again, it does feel from the question like it comes back to the intricacies of sort of staffing the vaccinations programme at scale and at pace from a number of different sources, and the routes into the vaccination programme at different times have differed slightly as the demand for, I guess, additional capacity has gone up and come down again, and then gone back up and come down again through the course of the year. And there will be provisions, I'm sure, in place for, if you like, maintenance of substantive contractual arrangements, but enhancements would be linked to the substantive role the individual does. Nonetheless, if that has an impact on the individual, it's important that they understand, or that it's perceived to be negative, or feels like it impacts negatively. Then it's important that people understand why that is, and I guess can make choices around that in as informed a way as possible. So if the person is happy for me to kind of join some dots up behind the scenes and get some more definitive advice to them via yourself on that, Mike, then we can do that.
No problem. Okie dokie. So the next one is again anonymous. It's from a colleague who says they've come across a lot of people with queries regarding pension changes, linked to those struggling at work with either health reasons or thinking about working reduced hours for their own well-being. They've asked if organisationally we could consider making more information or maybe even a tutorial available for people in this position. They've also mentioned some of the pension changes coming into effect on the 1st of April this year, and that's causing some uncertainty. Caroline, do you want to come in initially on that one? Or
yeah, I'm going to come in only to empathise with how difficult and complicated pensions and retirement and how complicated that is. And however, I know that Tom's going to come in with a response around the work that's been done again by Lorraine to try and make that as understandable as possible. And it is critical that we get the information to a level that is truly understood by all colleagues. So I'm just going to hand over to Tom, but I recognise why the question's being asked.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline, and thanks, Mike. Yeah, as Caroline said, Lorraine Hunter, our head of HR Service Centre and Payroll and Nurseries, is very involved in the work around providing clear information and guidance around changes to the pension scheme. And certainly it's something that Lorraine and I have discussed in our one-to-ones for a number of months now. The importance, I guess, of trying to ensure that we bust any myths about the changes to the pension schemes that are effective from the beginning of April, and that there is kind of clear communication and accessible communication for colleagues on that. In Lorraine, we're fortunate to have, I guess, one of the most experienced payroll leads in the country, and somebody who's really actively involved in and around this agenda nationally. And indeed, we've benefited locally in recent weeks from Lorraine's involvement in work nationally to provide greater clarity for staff, because she's been able to try some of that out here in the organisation. And so if people haven't seen it, I think that if I remember rightly, a slide set was developed by Lorraine that was very sort of easy to work through and follow in terms of understanding the changes to the pension changes and what they meant for people depending on I guess their start point, which pension scheme they'd started in the first place. And I think certainly we could easily get that recirculated. It was in the daily brief, and I mean, I understood it, and it is something that is quite complex to get your head around. I think that the pension changes and all that entails. We've got to be mindful, though, that at the same time we're not there to provide advice to people on pensions. That's the role of, if you like, other bodies, and something that people need to seek out independent advice on. But so when it comes to some of the specific circumstances you mentioned at the top of the question, I don't have any definitive answers on those, but it may be that Lorraine's slide deck, if we can get that reposted in the daily brief alongside this, is something useful for people to refer to, and maybe we'll deal with a good volume of the queries that are around the pension scheme at the moment, because it's vital we don't lose people because they feel they've got no other option but to leave because of the pension changes. That is not the case, and it's really important that people understand why that's so.
Mike, you're on mute.
That's 2 sessions in a row I've done that. I can't believe that.
It's good to know that you're human. Yeah. Just on the back of that, it might be worth us thinking, because I know that pensions remains a hot topic for everybody actually that it's relevant to. And I don't know how Lorraine would feel about doing a bit of a Q&A in the way that Tom's doing it with us, Mike. It might be something for us to explore if we had a pensions focused Q&A that would help people, once they've read the information or possibly looked at the slide set, just to say, right, I've done that, but now I still want to ask this question. But really clearly, I will just restate what Tom has. We are not in a position to give advice on pensions, just to help understand the facts.
I will ask Lorraine after this session, and if I haven't edited this bit out, then you can assume that she's up for it. So just to come on to the last question, this is another colleague who states they hear a lot from people that are worried about security of employment when they're deployed to another role, which obviously there are a fair few people doing at the moment. They've asked if Caroline could give a reminder and a bit of a reassurance that such deployments are temporary and they're being used as part of the major pandemic policy. Is that something you'd be able to do, Caroline?
Yeah, absolutely. So anybody that is deployed as part of the pandemic response, it is temporary and it will end. And Tom and colleagues spend a lot of time making sure that that is the case. So yeah, you have my absolute assurance. And as far as employment goes, then we can't say anymore how important it is to us that we attract, but also that we retain our current colleagues with us. So we are not in a place to be considering or have any level of desire to lose colleagues. And actually, the deployment piece is temporary. It was necessary, and I remain very grateful to everybody that's done that so well, because I know it's been really difficult. But I'll let Tom speak just a little bit more around the detail and the assurance piece from a policy perspective around it.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. And I think it's something that we greatly appreciate, the versatility that people have shown and the willingness to be deployed differently. And I know for some staff that's been a longer term thing than for others. But in all cases, it's been done under the heading of the policy we have around managing the workforce in a major incident, including a pandemic, because we've needed to be able to flex and respond to some unprecedented circumstances. That's different though from change, and we are very clear in with our staff side colleagues in partnership that anything that constitutes a longer term change needs to be looked at under the heading of the organisational change policy, and temporary deployment isn't a way to achieve that. What it maybe does do is give people the opportunity to experience doing something different, and for some folks that might lead them to want to pursue doing something different in the long term, and that's a positive, and hopefully if it supports our ambitions workforce wise in the long term, then that's good. But equally, I know there's security for people in the services that they their home service, if you like, the ones they've been deployed from, and so we expect that there'll be regular reviews of temporary deployments, and they'll be looked at least, I guess, on a monthly basis to check that they still remain valid and need to be in place. And as we move through the coming months, very much hope and expect that there'll be a move back to more substantive roles for colleagues who have, really put themselves out there for us by being temporary. And just one final point to make on this is that I think we all would like to move away from a position where we have to ask people to be temporarily deployed during periods of pressure to something where we've got that inbuilt versatility, but that gives people a sense of security about their roles and what they're doing and what they can expect to be doing, and that's all linked to the future shape of our services and the shape of the workforce that we need in order to be able to staff them, and that's a key priority for us as we look ahead and look at our 5-year plan for the future as to how we can ensure that, I guess, the workforce requirements we have meet the service needs we have, but also provide people with that opportunity for growth and development as well. So I hope from this will come lots of experience that people can draw on that's helpful to them in their growth and development. But I realise it's been a challenging period for many. And I just want to reiterate that assurance Caroline's given, that we don't want to lose people, and we want people to be able to feel that they can continue in the roles and the services that they joined in the fullness of time.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Oh well, that's us coming to the end of the session. I'm astounded we haven't had any impromptu interruptions from any dogs or children, etc. So well done to everybody involved. thank you to everybody for their interest and for watching. I know it's been a longer session, but I think in some of the questions were quite specific, but I think it's important that Caroline and Tom are willing to take these questions and to get answers for people. Yeah. So I'm grateful for their time. And just to reiterate, for the people who have submitted non-workforce questions, Caroline and I will do another session, hopefully in the next week, to address those. And just to thank everybody again, and I wish you well.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Tom.